Hey, welcome everyone.
Um, so Ashita and Mia, I can only attend part of the meeting today for about an hour or so. I have a personal commitment that I need to take care of.
Okay, well, I'm glad we have you for part of it. Thanks.
Thanks.
And I see Mary's on the call. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's see. We'll have a few more filter in until we get our quorum. Seeing 5, so we're a few short.
Chris is coming in, so we should have quorum.
Okay, great. Then once he joins, we'll get started.
Is there going to be an issue if Serini leaves? Will we?
Ben just joined as well, so we should be
Okay.
good.
Good call. Yeah, I wondered about that. Like, else comes. Yeah, but thank you, Emily. Yeah, good point. Okay, so I am seeing that we do have quorum, and we have a busy agenda and some guests today. So we'll get started. So I'll go through the agenda. As always, we have a review of our meeting minutes and updates from our tag liaisons. I see Emily here. We'll see if Matt is able to join. And then we have updates from the PUC from Dominic. And then we have our first guest speaker who I see is on the call. That's Ben Edgerly Walsh from the VPIRG, Vermont Public Interest Research Group. And then we'll have a public comment. Hi, Ben. Public comment. And then we have another set of guest speakers. We have Gail Pezzo and Mary Houghton from talking about manufactured homes, and Chris will introduce them. I see Mary, and we'll see if Gail joins us in a minute. And then we'll have another set of public comments. Oh, and I should say that we'll make time for both the Ben speech and the manufactured homes. We'll have we'll have a period of them just sort of sharing information and their thoughts, and we'll make sure we leave a little bit of time for EAG members to respond, and we'll open up our note keeping tool to take down any questions that the EAG members have or responses. And then after that public comment, we are going to just quickly talk about a conversation we've raised about what the potential study suggests about the low income credit requirement, and if we feel like we should sort of react to that proactively. And then a plan for responding to the PUC draft rule, which I believe will be coming out later today or tomorrow. And then we'll have feedback from the report editing subgroup, which met last week. And Ashira, I think the public engagement group did not meet. Okay, correct. So we'll just skip that part of the agenda. Next steps, and then we'll close. So as always, a packed agenda. Is there anything I'm missing that was supposed to be on the agenda? Okay.
Just to clarify, for the public engagement subgroup, were there any updates on do you have any updates at all, or? Okay, great.
Okay, thanks for clarifying, Sheila. Or Shara. Okay, thanks. Okay, so has everybody had a chance to read the meeting minutes from September 17th? Confirm they're up there. Okay, great. So are there any edits or corrections? Okay, hearing none. Can I have unanimous consent from the group to approve the meeting minutes from September 17th, 2024? And a show of digital hands is always helpful. Okay, I am interpreting that as unanimous consent, so I will consider those meeting minutes approved. And now I will hand it over to Emily to give us any updates from the technical advisory group.
Thanks, Mia. For the last tag meeting, Opinion Dynamics, who is the contracted entity working on the Clean Heat Standard Measure Characterization Study, they had released most of the elements of that study for the tags review by the time we met. So the 3 pieces that were released were the life cycle carbon intensity schedule, the delivered fuel measure characterizations, and the installed measure characterizations. The tag mainly discussed the life cycle carbon intensity schedule and a little bit of the delivered fuel measure characterizations. And I believe this week the tag will be continuing that discussion with Opinion Dynamics, and we'll be discussing the installed measure characterizations piece more thoroughly. And then the tag moved a memo forward to the PUC regarding some issues that Matt Coda brought up, and I don't think Matt's here. I was going to let him speak on that, but Matt's memo was regarding implementation issues in the Clean Heat Standard. And the tags memo on that memo was basically saying that nothing in that memo negatively affected the technical functioning of the Clean Heat Standard at this point. So if I remember correctly, I think that's pretty much what that said. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Emily. Pike?
Yeah, I've been following the tag the last few weeks, and I just wanted to express my concerns that it looks like the tag is moving towards emissions factors that include counterfactuals that will actually incentivize, in my opinion, and the opinion of some tag members, incentivize the actual creation of methane, because as it stands now, some folks on tag are pushing for actually negative emission factors for methane if it is used, and the counterfactual is otherwise it would be just emitted from, say, a farm rather than the counterfactual that would be flared. OD suggested a GWP bio of 0.32 for wood, which means that the emission factor would be reduced by about 2/3. I am arguing through the EPUC and emails to tag members that this is inappropriate, that the carbon emission factor should be what the EPA emission factor hub is, what's represented by the emission factor hub. ANR, who has one tag member in the membership, and who've been inviting other ANR members, are pushing for 0 carbon emissions from wood, as ANR has done for the last 20 years, and I'm also concerned about that. So I just want to voice those concerns.
Thanks, Pike. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to follow up with that?
Nope. Yeah, Pike's correct. There's been some lively discussion around the wood issue that's been continuing for a bit now. So I think that discussion will be continuing in this next tag if anyone's interested in being looped in. And I think somebody in the technical advisory group is writing up a little piece on both sides of the wood issue, just so that that's made clear what's being discussed. And I think that will be part of the technical advisory group meeting materials. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I would just take a look at the PUC's website for that.
Thanks, Emily. And I think also it would be helpful in your next meeting, or kind of whenever you get to it, when there is more information about measure characterizations of installed measures. I do think that would be helpful feedback to the EAG in terms of what we think, a clean heat standard might incentivize in terms of installed measures, because I think that may feel more directly impacting what our group is talking about. So as that information comes available, kind of a summary of that, I think would be super helpful, but we can talk about it when you're ready. Thanks. Ben?
I was just going to say that the Opinion Dynamics draft technical reference manual is out. So if folks on this group are interested in checking that out, they do have characterizations for installed measures, including weatherization and fuel switching measures. So if you folks did want to look at that and provide comments on it, that's currently available at the moment to make comments on. So just thought I'd throw it in there.
Okay, I'll talk with Ashira about getting that on the agenda in some form, or whether that's that makes sense. But thanks for flagging that, and we'll have people take a look if they're interested. Okay, anything else on the tag updates? Okay, I am going to turn it over to Dominic for updates from the PUC.
Hi, everybody. One big update today, which Mia has alluded to, the draft proposed rule will be coming out via EPUC today. I'd hope to be out before the meeting, but EPUC has a lot of back of the website things that just take a while to get through. So it will be published today. Alongside the draft proposed rule itself, we also have a companion document that we hope will be very useful, especially for the people who have been engaged in this conversation. We call it a status report, and what it basically does is walk through the elements of work that have informed and directly contributed to the draft proposed rule itself, and also the other elements that are not contained in the rule but are still very important for the program. It's worth noting that this rule itself is really just the skeleton of a program. It's the case for all PUC rules. If you go to our rules on our website, it is just kind of the rules of the road, and we have to go drive and make this program a real thing. So we are very much looking forward to people's opinion and feedback on the draft rule. October 7th, so next Monday from 10 a.m. to noon, we'll be holding a technical workshop. This is, to be clear, everybody is welcome at both of these meetings, but the first technical workshop will focus on those who have been engaged in this process. We will use it largely as a way to answer questions about the rule and how all of these pieces fit together, for the parts that aren't immediately obvious with the companion document. And then on October 30th, day before Halloween at 6:30 p.m., we'll have more of a general conversation about the CHS program and how our proposed draft rule addresses or is unable to address different aspects of this potential program. One of the other things I want to note, especially for EAG, is the work that this group did earlier in the year on an equity rubric is being highlighted as a release. The EAG's equity rubric is included in the release materials, and our order on the issue recommends that people do look at that rubric and use it to evaluate the draft rule. So, as we've had a lot of conversation with this group, it is difficult for one entity to use that rubric and try to apply it, given our own assumptions, biases, and areas that we're not tuned into. But we are hope that by having a wider swath of the public think about those questions as we're reading through the rule, we'll have a better use of that rubric, and we'll have more perspectives that can be channeled through it. So thank you for the work on that. The draft will be out today. I look forward to both this group collectively feedback as well as individuals on behalf of your organization or just based on your knowledge of this work. Aside from that, the PUC continue to be busy. We've got our pacing work that we hope to have in the next 2 weeks or so. That'll say how many credits each of the registered obligated entities will need to retire for a theoretical first year. We also are doing our economic analysis work, which is proceeding slowly but moving. And of course, all of the other little pieces of our check back report and program design. So we are very proud to be releasing this rule on time and in a complete form. We look forward to everybody's reaction and feedback to it.
Thanks, Dominic. I think it would also be really helpful. I didn't exactly catch those dates and times. Do you think you could send that to Ashira and then she can include it in the packet, and then that way the group can attend if they're able? So we'll put out in the meeting follow-ups that we'll send out after this. Awesome,
Yep,
thanks. Okay, Pike.
Yeah, I sent a notice of concern that Dr. Grubert has not been attending the TAG meetings and is on leave until mid-January. And I was wondering if the PUC shared those concerns and if they had any plans on finding another climate scientist in the meantime, or instead of Dr. Grubert.
Pike, I did notice that filing and made sure to flag it for Deirdre. The tags meeting is later this week, so I assume it'll be brought up then. Ashir might be able to confirm, but my understanding is that is in front of Catherine and Rick and Deirdre. Noted, we appreciate you doing that outreach and letting us know. We don't have any details at the moment. We are also figuring it out.
Yeah, I have no additional details on that.
And Dominic, I just had a question. Are you going to be soliciting comments on that draft ruling, or do you have like a comment
Yes.
period? Okay.
Correct. Thank you for bringing that up, Ben. We are hoping for mostly written comments, and we're hoping for a lot of written comments. That is in addition to the conversations that we'll be having in these advisory group meetings, in those public meetings, and the deadline for that will be November 1st.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. And Ben, we have a conversation later in this agenda about how the EAG will structure its limited time to get substantive comments out. So we'll adopt that later in the meeting. Any
Great.
other questions for Dominic? Okay, hearing none, we'll move right along. I am going to introduce our first guest speaker. That's Ben from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, or VPIRG. Does Ben, you have some slides? Hi.
I do. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, I'm looking at Ashira. Okay, should be good. Let me know if you have any problems.
Okay, let me go ahead. All right, just doing the customary. Can everyone see that? Great. Again, my name is Ben Edgerly-Walsh. I run the Climate and Energy Program for VPIRG and have for the past going on north of a decade now. So I've worked on a lot of thermal policy over the years, a lot of work to advance funding for weatherization and a whole host of other low and moderate income incentives, and was certainly involved in the legislature on the Affordable Heat Act. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about obviously Affordable Heat Act, what some of the goals of that bill are. Obviously you all have read it, so I'll be brief on that, and then get into a little bit around the pace at which this energy transition is happening. Some specifics of that, in particular around the Inflation Reduction Act. There's some really good data that has been, has come out recently on that, that I dug into a little bit, and then share a few thoughts on potential recommendations for you all to consider. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of information and a few opinions with you all. Excuse me. So first of all, just getting into the goals of the Affordable Heat Act. One, obviously, it's about hitting the climate requirements that the state has in the thermal sector. That's central to the bill. Everyone knows that. This is from the intent section of the bill. The second thing it lists is minimizing the cost of customers. It also specifically talks about affordable heat being essential, about protecting public health, and prioritizing customers with low and moderate incomes. And I just wanted to mention that at the top because obviously, if you're designing a bill with certain problems in mind that you're trying to solve for, you're going to design it a certain way. And from our perspective, this bill really was designed with low and moderate income Vermonters in mind, and really delivering benefits to low and moderate income Vermonters in a much more concrete way. A lot of legislation has sort of qualitative language that says, try to do this sort of thing. And that often, and we've seen this, over and over again at federal and state level on energy policy, does not result in really substantial equity deliverables happening. And certainly from VPIRG's perspective, we felt it was very important this bill was different and had very concrete deliverables in that regard. So I'm sure you've seen this requirement in this chart before. On the right-hand side, this is the whole sort of residential, commercial, and industrial thermal sector broken down in those three camps. Industrial 15%, commercial 31%, and the remaining 54% is the residential sector. And so there's this requirement in the bill that 32% split between low and moderate income of all the residential sector benefits or measures are flowing to low and moderate income customers, and that half of those are in fact delivered measures, installed measures that deliver cost savings over time to those customers. And that works out to be about 60% of all of the measures being delivered to residential customers under the program. That's critical from our perspective. In particular, the installed measure piece is critical. And a huge part of that is the price volatility that we see in the price of heating fuels. This is obviously a very busy graph. The main thing that I want to drive home here is if you look at a couple of these lines on the bottom, for wood pellets or for electric heat pumps, you see a pretty stable price over time. Fluctuates a little bit, goes up a little bit over time, but generally speaking, electricity is a very stable fuel source in the thermal sector. Obviously, this high bar here is electric resistance heat. That's not what we're talking about. And then for the other fuels, these are largely the delivered fossil fuels. They go up by $1, $2 more a gallon, fall again, go up, fall again. It happens every 5 years or so, is what we've seen over the last couple of decades. And just to drive that home a little bit more, if you were on oil between 2021 and 2022, a typical household could see their price or saw their price jump for heating their home over the course of a heating season by about $2,000. And that's in the context where we all know that so many, especially low and moderate income households, can't afford a $500 or $1,000 unexpected expense. And Putin decided to go to war in Ukraine, and all of a sudden Vermonters had a $2,000 unexpected expense. And so getting off of this sort of hamster wheel of unaffordable price volatile fuels is, from our perspective, a huge part of why this bill is important. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of pace of the energy transition. Got a number of slides here. I'll go through them pretty quickly. Number one, it's important to understand Vermont is adopting heat pumps at a very rapid clip. I'm using heat pumps, in particular, mini splits and the air-to-air heat pumps that you hear about as an example, because there's a lot of good data out there on them. This is true to varying degrees for a bunch of other technologies as well. Vermont has more heat pumps installed per capita than any other part of the Northeast, and the Northeast leads the nation in heat pump installations. Let me just get into this next one. So this is data from Energy Action Network. They analyze heat pump installations. This is from their last annual progress report, so the actuals are through 2021. But when you look at 22 and 23 data, it actually tracks this curve very well. We're nearly at 60,000 heat pumps installed in homes, another several thousand in residences, and we're installing right now at a clip of north of 11,000 heat pumps a year. So you just do some basic math, and what you find is that we're going to be by 2030, even absent additional policy interventions, at nearly half or maybe more than half of all homes in Vermont having some sort of heat pump installed. And we know that that is going to skew towards upper income or upper income Vermonters because of the install cost, because of the inability of lower income Vermonters to take advantage of some of the tax credits that are out there. And so all things being equal, that means less delivered fossil fuels. And if you're talking about a smaller volume of fuels over the same sort of fixed geographic area and equipment, you're probably going to see an increase in the price of fossil fuels without any sort of policy intervention because of how quickly these heat pumps are being installed. I want to shift to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act for a few minutes. Folks, I'm sure, are aware, this is the federal bill that passed a couple of years ago that had a whole host of expanded or extended tax credits for efficiency, electrification, and renewables. And so what we've seen over the course of the first full year of its implementation, 2023, is these measures being adopted at more than 3 times the pace that the federal government had initially expected them to be. That's a great thing. That's a fantastic thing. It does mean this energy transition is accelerating. And here in Vermont, there has actually been a dramatically higher uptake of these efficiency and electrification measures, even than that very fast clip that the nation is going on. When you look at the efficiency and electrification, so weatherization, heat pumps, on, those tax credits, about 3.3% of Vermont households in 2023 alone took advantage of those tax credits. In the United States as a whole is at 1.7%. So about twice as fast as the nation as a whole. So that tells me that Vermonters understand there's a real benefit here. They're looking to move in this direction. One other point on that. So when you look at the tax credits that are available for residential customers in this bill, there's renewables tax credits, largely that goes to solar, and then there are tax credits for efficiency and electrification. On the left, you see the breakdown between those two categories for the nation as a whole. About 3/4 of the money between those two tax credits is going to solar, and about 1/4 is going to efficiency and electrification. In Vermont, the split is 60% solar, 40% efficiency and electrification. And so, that again tells me that Vermonters really have a big focus on the kinds of measures that would be covered by the clean heat standard. But one other thing I just want to note briefly here, if you look at absolute number of installs in both cases, more in Vermont, you're seeing more installs for efficiency and electrification. The solar tax credits are uncapped. The efficiency and electrification ones are unfortunately capped. Obviously, it'd be great if the federal government changed that. You could draw down a lot more federal money for this sort of thing. But right now, that's the reality. So that's why the split is more heavily towards solar. One other thing I wanted to mention before I sort of get to, at least from my perspective, take homes, and then share a few thoughts on potential recommendations you all could consider. There are new technologies coming into this space. This is not a static area. A decade ago, heat pumps in Vermont was essentially unknown. It was, there were only a few thousand being installed. Cold climate heat pumps that could heat reliably below zero were only just coming on the market. A decade later, we've got nearly 60,000 of them in Vermont homes. And there's a new technology, actually, that Efficiency Vermont is just starting to pilot. These are window-mounted heat pumps. You can plug into a normal wall outlet. You don't need any special wiring. You don't need a crew to come out and install. You and a friend can do it yourselves. They work in any double hung window, which is nationally, I understand, slightly more than half of all the windows. I don't know the numbers in Vermont, but certainly it's quite a lot of the windows in the state of Vermont. And while these aren't going to fully transition a home to efficient electric heat, if put in a living space, could really significantly make a dent in the fossil heating, and by extension, largely, in most cases, make a dent in the cost of heating a home as well. And then they're obviously also, as a smaller unit, much cheaper to purchase and install than larger whole home or multi-head mini split system that would get more of the load done. So I mentioned this. While it's an emerging technology, there's a couple of companies coming out with these, or they just come on the market, because in particular for renters, this, at least from my perspective, really could be a game changer. There's a huge pilot going on in New York City. Again, Efficiency Vermont's doing a much smaller pilot here with several dozen rental households, in particular rental households, trying these out and getting some good data. They have cold climate models that can operate in Vermont winters, and where folks have grappled with this split incentive, where you want to benefit tenants who are low income, but they can't take the weatherization or the induction stove or whatever it is with them. This is actually something that could be delivered directly to low and moderate income Vermonters in a rental unit. And if they have to move to another rental unit, or they're able to purchase a home, they can bring it with them, bring the benefits with them as well. Okay, so wrapping up, and then hopefully we have a few minutes for any questions or thoughts you all want to share with me. From my perspective, what does this tell us? One, Vermonters are rapidly adopting these newer heating technologies. This is a transition that is moving at a clip that is accelerating. And then frankly, whether Vermont does anything on the policy side or not, is going to be very meaningful in the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, there's a lot of good reasons to try to accelerate this even further. But even if we just sat on our hands, it would move at a really meaningful clip. 2, low and moderate income Vermonters, unfortunately, just because of the realities of capitalism, the market dynamics, and how much money people have to spend on these sorts of things, are not going to be making this transition at nearly the pace that upper income Vermonters, who are more likely to be homeowners, more likely to have a disposable income, dramatically more likely to have the quote unquote tax appetite to take advantage of these tax credits, are going to be able to. Absent some sort of intervention, if we do something differently, we can change that story. Maybe not flip it on its head, but we can change it. If we don't do anything, it's not going to change. And lastly, there's an incredible opportunity right now to bring in tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars through the Inflation Reduction Act. Vermont households brought in $10 million through those measures that I mentioned from IRA tax credits in 2023. And if we're able to really lean into this, and for moderate income Vermonters especially, who might have tax appetite but not be able to afford the upfront install price, we could bring in, again, tens of millions of dollars over the next decade to help pay for these things and help Vermonters reduce their energy costs on, to some degree, the federal government's dime. And that seems like a great thing to me. And we can do that if we actually take some sort of big policy intervention like the Affordable Heat Act, like the Clean Heat Standard that you all are contemplating and weighing in on. Lastly, a few quick thoughts on policy recommendations or recommendations for the report that you all are preparing. One, I know obviously it goes without saying, but there's a very real and meaningful and appropriate concern about the price of fossil fuels that Vermonters are using going up. Well, I've looked at the numbers. I don't think they're going to go up nearly as much as some other people do, but the price is very unlikely to be zero. And so while you can see more people being, having their homes weatherized and taking advantage of these opportunities, obviously you're not going to be able to get to everyone on day one. And so to the extent that the default delivery agent is able to emphasize measures that reach more households, maybe at a slightly, having slightly lower impact on each household, you're able to get to a larger swath of the market, at least to some degree, faster. Things like the window heat pumps that I was mentioning. 2, again, using those window heat pumps as an example, recommend to the technical advisory group that they have a process for rapidly incorporating new measures or technologies, maybe a preliminary measure characterization for year 1 that can be revisited, rather than what we've seen over in tier 3 of the renewable energy standard. In some instances, technologies stalling for a year or 2, or even I think in some cases, maybe as many as 3 years between initial sort of proposal and through the data gathering phase, actually allowing them to be qualified measures under the program. That would be a real shame, especially when we're talking about measures that could have a meaningful impact on the equity of the program. And lastly, recognizing that installed measures for low and moderate income Vermonters require higher subsidies for reasons we're all familiar with. If anyone's looking at the cost of this program, one of the first places you would logically reach to reduce the total cost is this requirement that I mentioned at the top. So if I were in your shoes, I would recommend that stay strong, that's a critical piece of the program. And so that's my last thought for you all. Not necessarily asking for a change, but just emphasizing that is critical if you're trying to follow the legislative intent of focusing on low and moderate income Vermonters and serving them well. And that is what I've got for you. I'm happy to stick around for any questions or conversation. And I can stop sharing my screen unless I can share again if anyone wants to, take another look at one of those slides, and I will send them along after the meeting.
Yeah, thanks for both, so we can see everyone and we'll share if needed. And then Aishwarya is actually going to share. We don't usually take notes during the guest speaking, but we will be taking notes on EAG responses to that, so we have it for our records. Srini, I'm going to open it up to you first.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ben, for the summary. It's very useful. It's good to see some data that is actually based on the impact of IRA. So I will ask the question specific to that. So you showed a chart of relative performance of Vermont to the rest of the country, I believe, on electrification and efficiency measures for tax credits. Can you be a little bit more elaborate on that? You showed it as a percentage. What is the total number of installations that represent in Vermont since IRA has been introduced? I suppose that data is from the IRA statistics.
It is, and I included a link in the slide deck where you can just download a spreadsheet of that sort of thing. But the specific number you're asking about for electrification and efficiency, it's about 9,500 households, which again works out to just north of 3%.
Okay, and that's over the last year and a half or so?
That's 2023 specifically. So presumably 2024 numbers would be similar, hopefully a little bit higher.
Okay, so we have debated this question of how many people can really afford to do the initial capital investment to take care of the tax credits for both residential as well as business owners. And so the impact of IRA, you know, whether it's going to help us along the way or whether we need to do something differently to gain some kind of momentum behind it. That's what I was trying to get at. But it sounds like 9,000 in 2023 is a substantial number.
I would certainly agree with that. I mean, again, I think that the federal government was anticipating slower uptake. And Vermont, at least on this measure, is moving at a more rapid clip than the nation as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, and this might get into technical stuff, but something you said, Ben, about the window units and encouraging like promising new technology. So like it is a window unit, but it's a heat pump, and you know Act 18 says heat pumps, and I can't remember the exact language, but are you saying that requires, like, since it's a different like flavor of the technology, a different like tag approval to get it characterized as a measure? Like I'm curious how that shows up in the process.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. I have not looked at the draft TRM, Technical Resource Manual, reference manual. I would assume it needs a separate characterization because they are smaller. I mean, just to state it in plain language, if you've got a installed traditional mini split cold climate heat pump, it's probably going to have a higher capacity than one of these, and so I would think you need a separate characterization. So that's my assumption. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and maybe Emily can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. And then just generally, I don't remember exactly where the conversation led off, but I do remember the technical advisory group having a discussion around what the process might be in the future for new measures to be incorporated and what that process is. I don't think that we have fully had that discussion or landed on any solutions from my memory, but I think that's a conversation to be had, and I think the tag is going to be contributing to what that process looks like. But feel free to jump in, Dominic or Ben or anyone else, if I got that wrong.
No, I think you're right. I was just thinking about it from a performance. If it has substantially different, performance parameters, that for the actual unit might need a new characterization. But I guess what we'd have to see specifically. But that could be a really great tool for a split incentive problem, that renters face. And we could see a greater adoption of fuel switching measures through that type of unit. So that's definitely something that's promising, at least on its face. So thanks for sharing that with us, Ben.
Yeah, I think that's something we might want to discuss in the report for the state. You know, we won't be able to see through the life of Efficiency Vermont's pilot, but to tell the state to kind of keep an eye on it. And if it looks promising and people are getting good results, you know, in their homes, that's something for the state to potentially consider further investments in. So we'll consider that for our report. Are there any other questions or comments for what Ben shared? Well, I'm not hearing any, but I think this was really helpful for the group to see the sort of larger picture. We've been really focused on what's happening in the text and things about prices, but I think situating it in the larger context of what's going on with you know, decarbonization is super helpful. And there's some great data in there that I think will be really helpful to get a copy of and consider incorporating in our final report. So thanks for having us. No, thanks for coming. So we
Thank you for
Okay.
having me.
Yeah, something like that. Anyways, I will turn it over to Ashira to see if there's any public comment on the items we just discussed.
Yes, thanks, Mia. So we'll go ahead and open for public comment. If you have a comment, we ask that you limit it to 2 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and circle around if there are not any more comments. So if anyone in the public has a public comment, this is your chance. We'll have a couple other chances throughout the meeting as well. So go ahead and come off of mute and speak into the room if you have any comments.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, right. Okay. Okay, could we stop sharing the note-taking tool temporarily? Thanks. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Chris to introduce our guest speakers who are here to talk to us about manufactured homes.
I am personally ecstatic about having Gail and Mary who have agreed to join us as guest speakers. And I'm really hoping this format can be just, you know, just an open conversation. And it's just best when it's interactive. We've taken an opportunity as a group to kind of compile some initial thoughts, but time has passed, and I really thought it'd be great to have both Gail and Mary join and just talk about heating and cooling challenges in our manufactured home communities. They both have been involved at a legislative level. You know, I'll let Mary and Gail introduce themselves. And, you know, I think this would be just a great conversation to help us really just inform our final recommendation and what we've learned so far, and what do we still need to learn. This is a pretty complicated topic, and folks are starting to pay attention when they hear things. So maybe if I could, Gail, would you mind introducing yourself, and then Mary, and then I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. My name is Gail Pezzo, and I am the board president of Westbury Homeowners Association. We have 250 units, 183 acres. This whole concept is very new to me. Chris had reached out to me, I believe, in July. I started to do, coincidentally, I started to do a little digging on something else, and I spoke to a heating and cooling person, and they gave me some information. And so anything that I'm going to add to the conversation is very much hearsay and what I'm hearing in our mobile home park and others. And I'm going to leave out the part of all the other information I get outside of the park, because the numbers, what people are speaking about regarding numbers, is anywhere from a couple of cents on a dollar all the way to $8, that if this is implemented, and people's fuel will go up anywhere from a couple of pennies to $8 per gallon. Do you want me to move forward, or you want Mary to introduce herself?
Yeah, I'm Mary Houghton. I'm my relative experience is that I'm on the board of the Tri-Park Housing Cooperative in Brattleboro as a community member, not as a resident. So I'm not speaking from direct personal experience, but Tri-Park has been in the process of a major redevelopment for the last, well, actively in the process for the last 4 years. And part of it is, well, the primary mover was to relocate folks out of the flood hazard area at one of the parks. And that will involve providing them with new energy efficient homes. So that in itself creates its own problems. I saw in your notes that you had considered that as one of the options. And right now we're asking people to sign up for that. And one of the concerns is that their property taxes are going to go up. And we're hoping to be able to demonstrate that their utility costs will go down enough to offset that. So as a first piece.
What kind of heating and cooling challenges are residents experiencing today? You know, Bennett gave a nice presentation talking about the uptake and conversion to heat pumps. What's the experience you know in your communities about that uptake?
you
I
directing
can speak to that. Go ahead, Gail.
So one of the things with mobile home living is that unless you have a new energy efficient home, mobile homes are notorious for being not having proper insulation. So one of the concerns that came up when I was speaking to someone is, if they were to have a heat pump, what does that mean if they're not using their kerosene burner? And that ductwork is what helps to keep the water system pipes. It's one of the avenues that keeps the water pipes from freezing. So because none of us really know what all of this entails, I mean, the information that I got, I was interested in how much space does the unit take up. Westbury is a very large mobile home park. We have a lot of space. There's others that there's maybe 5-6 feet between houses, maybe 10 the most. And if a unit is 3 by 3, that was one of the, part of the information that I received. But where does that go? We don't have basements. I also had heard that you need a backup system in Vermont. I don't know if that's true. I think the newer heating pumps are a lot more efficient than what some people are familiar with. So there's a multitude in a mobile home because it's not brick and mortar, not a step-built home. There's other problems that occur just by forget about the expense, because that's a whole nother ball of wax. But is it even practical to be able to install these space-wise, or how does it affect your heating system with your pipes that are underneath your trailer?
I can answer that question if you'd like, Gail. Yeah. So I used to work at Southeastern Vermont Community Action as an energy auditor. So Mary, I'm actually very familiar with the Tri-Park and Glen Street mobile home parks there that you're mentioning. But yeah, Gail, you're right. The mobile homes are a total. There's actually a totally different technical manual for them in terms of when you go to weatherize or upgrade a mobile home, because they're so different. But you're right. If the kerosene units that are in most of the mobile homes are designed to the ductwork is designed to actually leak heat underneath the mobile home to keep the pipes from freezing in the center belly section. So really, if a mobile home is to transition to a clean heat technology such as a heat pump, it really has to be done in conjunction with weatherization, or the mobile home needs to have been weatherized previously. Depending on the unit, like if you have a traditional kerosene furnace, they do have heat pumps that work in the furnace closet of a mobile home. However, they run off of propane, so there is a need to switch from kerosene over to propane. And then what it is a propane heat pump kind of dual fuel system, where the heat pump runs in the more mild winter days and then switches over to propane in the colder days. So it's we actually did Sevka. I say we, when I worked at Sevka installed a dual fuel system in the Tri-Park mobile home community. Couldn't tell you exactly which home we put it in, but it was down near the front. It is possible, I will say that, but it is about twice the cost. Of course, you do need to do any fuel switching that's needed. So to answer your question, Gail, I guess it is possible, but it is more costly to make that transition.
So then there's another issue that comes up with that, because if you have kerosene furnace, not all of them can be converted to propane.
Yep.
And not all propane or kerosene, I think it's a coil that needs to, I'm just being a parrot here. I have no idea what it all means, but a coil that needs to be installed. And that depends on the age of the furnace and the model of the furnace. So it's not as simple as, well, I have propane now. I did have kerosene at one time. My kerosene furnace could not be converted to propane.
Right. Yeah.
Because of its age, because of its model, and I would imagine the same.
Yeah.
So that creates.
You have to remove the whole thing and swap out a new one. Yeah, you're right. And if you have an existing propane unit, it generally needs to be swapped with a new propane unit that can accept what's called the A coil. Looks like an A, sits on top of the heat exchanger, and that's the heat pump portion. So yeah, there's a number of steps that I know the weatherization program and cost. Yep. So for reference, a new standard mobile home furnace, kerosene is going to run you about $7,000 installed. A propane dual fuel system that I'm talking about with a heat pump is going to be about $15,000. So yeah, there's a significant cost difference there. Yeah.
And then there's the electrical. Then there's the electrical part of it, which in our park, I get BTUs and amps mixed up. So if I say it wrong, but there are some homes that are 60 amp. When we do our electrical upgrades, we're only upgrading to 100 amps. And from my understanding, it needs to be 200. But I just spoke to someone this morning, because mobile homes are smaller, it can suffice with 150 amps, and that's running it to the grid, and that is thousands and thousands of dollars. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, I'm just parroting.
No, you're correct. Yep.
And can I ask for just a clarification, since you're talking about that? Does the service to be upgraded at the individual unit, or the community, or both?
So there's the panel upgrade in the unit. So the panel is typically located in like the closet area of a mobile home, often in like the primary bedroom area or in the hallway, which is sort of a tricky spot. I just point that out because it's kind of an additional infrastructure issue. So the panel itself needs to be upgraded to accept the larger amperage, 150 or 200. 150 is typically enough for a mobile home. And then the conductor size that comes from the meter. So there's a couple different parts. There's the utility, like off the 3-phase power, needs to drop, make sure the conductors coming from the 3-phase power to the meter are sufficient, and then from the meter to the home, which oftentimes the meters are in a meter bank at the center of, in some parks, the meters will be like in one central location. And then the wires go from the meters out to the various spots in the mobile home park. So yeah, there's quite a bit of coordination that needs to happen between the mobile home parks and the utility oftentimes to make that happen. A lot of trenching to upgrade the feeder wires, etc. So yeah, logistically it can be challenging for sure.
And it's fairly expensive.
So if you're thinking about a place like, oh, it's thousands. It's thousands of dollars.
Oh, price, yeah.
If you
it
take
can
a place
be
like Westbury, which is 54.
Yeah, I've actually talked to, I don't know if Chris, you've chatted, but gosh, yeah, we chatted. I was in a meeting about a month ago, but upgrading an entire park can be, I mean, if you have like someplace like Tri Park, for example, that's got hundreds of units in it, if you want, let's say you wanted to upgrade that entire home or entire mobile home park, you'd be looking at like $1 million, ish, or maybe 750,000, but it's substantial. But that's why, I think in our discussions we've had in the EAG, we've definitely been talking about different ways that we could serve and, folks in mobile homes could take advantage of the clean heat standard. And I think, these issues are certainly central to that. And I think we've talked a lot about the weatherization assistance program, such that like organizations like SEVCA and CVOEO run. There's a lot of reliance on them to get a lot of this work done, but of course, they can only do so much. So that's when different technologies like we just heard about, like with these window heat pump units, that may be something that folks in mobile homes could take advantage of. I don't know a ton about that, about those units yet, but yeah. You guys are, Gail and Mary, you're definitely hitting on some of the greatest hits here with the mobile home challenges. So
keep in mind also that a lot of mobile homes are in privately owned parks where the owners don't have any incentive really to upgrade their electrical whatevers.
Yeah. So it's almost like a similar issue to what we see with the rental population. It's like, they would, yeah. So it's sort of like the split incentive issue, which we often refer to for renters, where, a renter might not be, they pay for the heat, but they don't own the building, similar situation in a mobile home park, right?
Yeah. The other thing we found in talking about installing brand new mobile homes is there's an even worse than normal dearth of people familiar with the construction technologies that's needed because they're installed differently. So that's another training opportunity, I think.
Yeah. And Mary, I'm curious, since we're chatting about this, do you have a sense of, like, for example, Tri Park, as I mentioned, I'm familiar with it, but the average age of the mobile homes in that park, like what kind of age range, like is there quite a few older homes?
There are definitely quite a few older homes, and we're estimating that the actual value of the home itself can be $15,000 or $20,000, especially some of the older homes in the floodway. And I mean, you'd have to be nuts to put another $15,000 into that. It's like an old car.
Right. So that's certainly an issue as well.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the EAG, especially those relating, when we start thinking about writing our report, are there any questions for Gail or Mary related to manufactured homes and some of the challenges or some of the benefits? Yeah, Mia.
Yeah, I think for context, Mary, Gail, just so you might not be aware, so we've been advising the PUC about drafting the clean heat standard, but a lot of our work is working to this report that we're writing for the legislature, and it's going to say sort of our recommendations along the clean heat standard, but also recommendations for other programs to help groups like people living in manufactured homes about like other things the state should be thinking of besides just this, specific policy. So I think this would be great if you had any thoughts, either of you, about like, what would you like the legislature to know or take action on for people in your communities?
Wow. I feel like we already did this with the Legislative Mobile Home Task Force.
Sure. And we could
But-
reference that. That's a good thing for us to do, reference those recommendations. I just think it's an opportunity for us to say like, hey, these issues are still here,
Yeah, well, not just for mobile homes, but the lack of construction and engineering people in the state is really significant.
So Mary, I don't know if you remember, but very often during the mobile home task force, I was trying to reel us back to the existing stock because a lot was being spoken about with new homes and energy efficiency. And I kept on trying to bring us back to, well, what do we do about the stock that we already have? That I have a 1982 mobile home, and I'm not the oldest one in the park. And mine is in decent shape. I've done some upgrades, but what do you do with the existing stock that has tremendous energy inefficiencies?
Thank you.
And I'm just, oh yeah, Chris, go ahead. We're having a little trouble hearing you, so.
I'm sorry. I think that hits the issue right on the head, though. It's the existing stock that won't be able to that may not be able to upgrade. And so how do they receive the benefit of the clean heat standard? They're paying that premium on fuel, but they're not receiving that benefit. Just that's the thing that I just the age of homes in our communities. It's just, we're asking a portion of our residents just to pay a higher cost, and they're not going to receive the benefit of this. That's the part where how do we just close that gap with our recommendation?
Yeah, I kind of tangential to that, related to that, Chris, I did have, or Mary and Gail had a question. Do you have a sense of how many residents in the parks that you serve or live in are aware of the weatherization assistance program and kind of the programs that are run by the CAP agencies such as SEPCA or CVOEO and others? Do you have a sense of that?
In my park, I really believe there's a good majority. I very often will put things, we have a common area mail room, and I will put on the bulletin board anything with the MERV program, WISP program, energy efficiency, anything that is new or where there's some money to tap into. Of course, because it's a process, and because I think the MERV program, there's not a financial cap as far as you have to be eligible financially. But there's a bunch of people in our park that have taken advantage of energy efficiency with underbellies for the mobile home and roofs, things to do with roofing. I believe that was the program. So I would say a majority. In
Okay,
our
good.
park.
Yeah, I don't have a sense. And I suspect there are probably a lot of people who think, oh yeah, I heard about that, but I'm not eligible, and never bother contacting anyone.
That is true.
Yep.
That is absolutely true.
Yep. Yeah, I asked just because I think, as I referenced, we've talked about that quite a bit, how that, the weatherization assistance program is really central to getting mobile homeowners and mobile home renters assistance. So just was curious about kind of if there was sort of any additional outreach that needed to happen on that front, because that may be one of the recommendations coming out of this group, is that we really make sure that folks living in these in mobile homes are fully aware of all the programs that exist for them, because at least I see that as kind of the primary avenue through which folks can benefit from, clean heat measures, and not have to pay that a high upfront cost. So
Yeah, I agree.
Wasn't there, if a heat pump, just as an example, costs $6,500 to install, and there's a $1,500 rebate, and I think GMP, there's also $800, that's still a very heavy lift for a low income to moderate income in a mobile home park. To come up with,
I would call it an impossible lift.
$5,000. And that's the question I get is what's the bottom line expense and the projected savings, if any?
Yeah, Chris and I had a conversation about this some months ago, and thinking about the people I know, to install something like that, the cost would have to be zero, and the technical assistance would have to be free as well.
right. Yeah, because there's owning these, there's kind of two parts like you identified. There's having the system in your home, and then there's knowing how to use it appropriately, because if you have a heat pump and don't necessarily or aren't aware that it can cover your heat load, and you end up running your fossil fuel system anyway to heat your home, then you're not getting that benefit that could come from it. So I think, yeah, education is certainly a key piece of the, clean heat standard rollout here. So
And
it's good to flag.
I'd imagine there's a maintenance expense that you don't actually have with the furnace that's either propane or kerosene.
Yeah, with a heat pump unit, there is very little maintenance involved. I mean, probably the biggest is, they do have to be cleaned. The filters on them need to be cleaned and et cetera, which I know the community action agencies are educating folks that they're able to install these, and they're letting them know that doesn't need to be done annually. I mean, if you have a ton of pets in the house or something, it's probably good to clean the filter more often than not, but there is a little bit of cost savings, yes. From a maintenance perspective, you don't need to have that clean and tune done to the burner system. So
I want to check in real quick to see if there's any other questions from the EAG members, or Gail or Mary. It's fine. We can keep going back and forth on this page. I just noticed that there are a few people who are kind of quiet, and I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to speak if you wanted to. Go ahead, Mia.
I have a question, though not that you've already heard from me, but yeah, I'm curious. So I work for a housing agency, and we're kind of upstream from some of this, but we funded some manufactured home replacements. Especially I think in Tri-Park as well, for homes in the floodway, but in other communities where it's not safe to continue living in that home. And I just wondered if either of you had any experience with sort of manufactured home replacement programs. I know there's some issues with financing and being able to afford that, but I'm just curious if you have any experience with how that's gone. Replacements are an eligible measure under the Clean Heat Standard, so that's sort of an eligible thing clean heat credits can be derived from, but it'll be one of those things to see in practice how much it happens.
When you say eligibility, what exactly do you mean as far as getting a new home?
Yeah, so the Clean Heat Standard basically, so under the Clean Heat Standard, people who import fuel into the state need to be responsible for clean heat measures. So they need to perform various projects to reduce fossil fuel use, and manufactured home replacements are sort of an eligible thing that they could do. So if a housing agency is replacing a manufactured home, an existing one, with a new energy efficient model, that counts as one of those projects and sort of could set up a revenue stream. But I think that's one of those, there's a lot to fill in the blanks with how that will happen. But I am curious, like, it's possible that a Clean Heat Standard could make sort of more resources for doing manufactured home replacement. I'm not sure how much this will happen, but it's something I've been interested in, about like the experience of accessing these sort of newer models to deal with the homes that are like going to be really hard to weatherize and put a heat pump in. So I'm just curious if anyone in your communities has had that experience with a new replacement home.
Not that
Nope.
they've had, I have someone right now that was interested in putting in a new home on a lot that's going to become available. And when they found out the cost, and I even had mentioned something about getting some assistance for the slab, the
Mhm.
foundation, and the numbers came to 160 to 180,000
Mm.
just to remove the old home, put in the new home with the slab. So they lost interest immediately.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
No, I
at
think-
Tri Park, we're not quite to that stage yet. We hope to be able to put in new homes next year, but it's what I said earlier. People are concerned that they're, even though they're going to get the home at no cost to them, thanks in part to VHFA and also the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, they're concerned that their property taxes will go up. And we don't have the data yet to show them, or to show ourselves even, how much their utility costs will go down. So, and people can't take another, even $30 a month.
No, I totally
we
understand. That's a good point.
We see that here as well. And my taxes, because I have a 1982, are a little under 600. My neighbor, 4 houses away, and their home is 4 years old, they installed it. Their taxes are over $2,000.
Yeah.
Actually, the home is five years old. So that's something that someone takes into consideration also.
No, thank you. That's helpful perspective, and I don't think I had really thought about the difference in property taxes. I just think it's useful. Like we're running into this problem of some homes can't easily be weatherized or have a heat pump, and replacing it might be the best option, but that even if the unit is free, that doesn't change everything. And part of that calculus. But I think that's important for us to highlight that the availability of that as a clean heat measure doesn't solve all the problems we'll encounter with that. So really helpful. Are there any other questions for Gail and Mary?
I guess I was just curious. We've covered a lot here, but you mentioned the mobile home task force, which I have looked into that work. But since we're, in this public meeting and stuff, I don't know if you could recall some of the kind of top line or most prominent issues that you say are facing mobile home communities today. If there's anything additional you'd like to add in terms of other issues or hardships that mobile home communities are facing now, outside of what we've talked about.
I can't think of anything more than what we spoke about at the task force.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Gail, would you mind repeating the name of the task force, the title of the report that you've been referencing, so we can include that in our materials?
That was Vermont Mobile Home Task Force.
It was a legislative task force?
Yes.
I might have it referenced in the sources right above this, but if not, I'll make sure it gets added.
I think it's worth also alluding to, what we already talked about with like Tri Park. These communities are on the front lines of climate change and flooding. A lot of these communities have been built in land that is flood prone, and the climate change impacts are being felt more strongly there than in other parts of the state, faster. So I think we're already seeing a disproportionate impact with those groups, even before we think about the clean heat standard.
Yeah, sure.
I was just going to echo that comments, Mia. I mean, it sounds like from the comments we have heard so far, the investment, the initial investment cost to address a variety of problems, from the climate change issues, from weatherization, keeping the plumbing warm during wintertime. All these things just alludes to a significant complexity for the subgroup of households. And if you look at the greenhouse emissions from a contribution perspective for mobile homes, the way I characterize the mobile homes is through the identifier of use of kerosene. If you look at the inventory for the last 5 or 6 years, it's less than 1.5% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So I think these communities will benefit largely from addressing the climate change issues first, and then worry about the greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think clean heat standards should take a priority over other prevailing issues for these homes. Otherwise, it will just make everything more complicated, even though the intent is to make sure that the fuel prices don't go up. I suggest that in the law for this particular segment, we almost have to take the approach of having a period of 10 or 15 years where they are completely exempt. I mean, considering that the greenhouse gas emissions are only less than 1.5%, I think that will be a more pragmatic approach than trying to force fit a rule for this very unique group of households.
I think that may be a good suggestion, Srini. So you're basically suggesting basically funding for this segment for the climate adaptation, rather than.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, the state can better distribute the funds on other low-income households to address the greenhouse gas emissions more effectively. And for this segment, this should not be the priority. So. Thank you.
Okay, we're coming close to the end of our time. I don't want to shut down this great discussion, though. Are there any other questions from the group? Okay, Gail, Mary, is there anything else we missed that you'd just like to add to the discussion?
So I don't know if this is really relevant, but one of the things that came to mind about what a lot of the focus at the Mobile Home Task Force was whether mobile homes are personal property or real estate property. So, Mary, do you remember what came out of that? Because that was a gigantic focus, and I think that is probably the only thing that moved forward into legislation.
Yeah, no, it's a big question, and it's sort of it depends partly on who owns the land and how the lender feels about it.
Right.
So I don't know that it's really relevant to this group, although it might be. I don't know. I just haven't thought about it in that context.
Well, so the only reason I bring it up, there are many people in our park that would love to get a new mobile home, but they aren't able to because, number one, interest rates are so high for a mobile home. The other thing is that we just had someone that was going to purchase an old mobile home, a new applicant. Day before closing, the bank pulled out, and the reason was because the bank didn't realize that he wouldn't be owning the property. So his intention was to buy the home and upgrade it or put a new one on because it's an old home, and then the deal fell through. So it's relevant as far as, I would love to get a new mobile home. The only reason I didn't is because back 3, 4, 5 years ago, just the slab would have been between 15,000 and 20,000. And there was no programs that could help you with the slab at all.
Yeah, that's a great point, that people can't access affordable financing.
So I just want to end with this. From a personal perspective, I want to do anything I possibly can in my life to reduce my carbon footprint or anything having to do with energy resilience. However, it has to be practical. It has to be something that's within my budget. You know, I'm 72 years old. I don't want to spend every dime that I have on just where I live. But I'm in a better position than some other people. And I know what that's like for them to just, you know, we don't have a large population of elderly anymore. It's down to about 30 or 35%, but it's single income. And they have a hard enough time just upkeeping the home that they have now. And unfortunately, the last thing on their mind is energy efficiency, only because of the finances, not because they don't want to make it doable.
Thank you. I think that's a really good note for us to end on. I really appreciate your time in speaking to us. That's some really good perspective about that I think will make its way to our final report. So really helpful. Thank you for your time. And yeah, we'll reach
Thank you
out
for
to you.
having me.
This is great. Yeah, thank you so much. Gail.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, Gail. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, so we
Thank
are
you.
to, I think, take public comment on this. And let's see, if anyone wants to do public comment, I think we're probably still at around 2 minutes each. Can we have digital hands raised or come off mute? Okay, I am not seeing anything, so we will move on. I am going to hand it over to Ashira for our next item on low-income credits.
Thanks, Mia. Okay, so last meeting we talked a little bit about the potential study and the thought that even if all 16% of if all low income and moderate and I think no, just low income households were to transition, we still would not make the 16% that is asked for in the legislation. So we decided we should discuss that a little bit. And so the question is, and I'll put it at the bottom of this as well so that we can keep track of our notes. The question is, if meeting the low income credit requirement may prove challenging, as suggested in the potential study, should the EAG make any proactive recommendations to the legislature in its final report? So we were hoping that you had some time to think about that a little bit. I sent out this question earlier, but if anybody has some concrete recommendations, suggestions, thoughts about this, I'll also add in the wording from, the wording from the legislature itself. Something's happening, but I'll copy and paste it in. But in the meantime, if anyone wants to get us started on that conversation, feel free. Yeah, go ahead, Pike.
Yeah, I think this is a statutory requirement. I've said this before, and suggesting that there's some reason that the PUC and the designated delivery agent and others who are going to be implementing this have reason not to meet their statutory requirements is really not appropriate. We just have to articulate that despite the difficulties, they have to meet those targets.
Pike, yeah, Mia.
Yeah, I'll add just for context. I think that's absolutely true, Pike, and I don't expect to see the PUC to make a recommendation to decrease that requirement. As far as I'm aware, no one has discussed this. I think this was raised and kind of floating around in the potential study, and I think it's worth thinking about what happens when this policy reaches the legislature. Again, I've heard no one suggest that the requirements are going to be decreased, but if that's a discussion that happens in the legislature, I think we should be prepared to talk about, I don't know, other things that the legislature could do besides decreasing that requirement or something. I don't know if it maybe is just a simple statement of, we hear that this is challenging, you still should not decrease that allocation. But I think it would show up in the legislative session, if at all. Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of, I mean, well, the latest memo that we just submitted to the PUC that we voted on last meeting sort of opined on that. Just, you know, we expanded the LMI, or the pool of eligible LMI credit producing activities, I guess is the way to say it. So that I think was good on our part to do that, to suggest that, you know, those nonprofit entities that directly serve the low income population be eligible for obligated parties to produce LMI credits from. I think that'll certainly help, but yeah, I mean, the potential study did basically come to the determination that it is going to be very difficult to hit that 16% target, as Pike alluded to. You know, I think expanding, again, what I just said is expanding that pool of eligible LMI credit areas would be one way to do it. And, you know, I think, Pike, kind of what you're getting at is, I mean, it's a good point. We don't want to let the obligated parties off the hook and just say, oh, well, potential study said you can't hit the target, so, you know, don't worry about it. I don't think, yeah, I don't think we want that to happen, but it's also, it's a tricky situation because we also don't want to set a target that potentially is unattainable. So there's sort of the equity considerations of the actual rule itself and how it will affect the business operations of the obligated parties. You know, obviously for the entire system to work, we want the obligated parties to be existing within a regulatory environment that actually is attainable. So yeah, it's a tricky situation. You know, the low and moderate income target was able to be attained from the 16%. You know, that on the low and moderate income, 16% could be attained. So, I mean, I guess in terms of us opining on this topic for the final report, I think we're kind of at an impasse in a sense. I'm not sure how much we can really say about that. It's sort of, I don't want to just say wait and see, but that's sort of where we're at. I will say the low income attainment or GHG reduction, you know, as it was mapped, was over the life of the program. So I guess it's maybe technically feasible for an obligated party to hit the target in maybe the early years by doing a little bit extra work, and then they would have trouble hitting it in the later years. So yeah. But we do know that the low-income population is a small slice of that. As Srini alluded to with the mobile home conversation there, it's a pretty small slice of the greenhouse gas pie, as it were, in Vermont. So yeah, I don't know if any others have any kind of anything to add there, or what you think we should do, or if we should just sort of let it lie and then comment on, be a little bit more reactive than proactive to that topic. I'd be open to suggestions.
Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't know when or if like our legislative report is kind of the last bite at the apple. I mean, there may be testimony asked from this group, but like the report is the last time we really get to speak to the legislature for sure about this. And I don't know if we can foresee, like, I don't know when, if ever, a question of changing that 16% allocation would ever happen. I don't think that's going to come out of the draft rule or the final report from the PUC. this is just like our final report is the last time, and I think we don't have to make a decision now, but I think we should think about if that needs to show up in our final report some way as an extra urging not to do anything. I don't know. Like, I take Ben's point. There's a wait and see option. I just don't know that it'll be clear to us when we'll see, I guess, if that makes sense. So I'm fine leaving it for now, but I thought it would be helpful to bring up this group so we're prepared to talk about it in the final report if we want to. Thanks.
I think in my personal preference is that we do touch upon that in our final report. I think for us to see the results from the potential study as they are now and then not say anything would sort of be, you know, a glaring omission in my mind. I think it needs to be opined upon by this group. And I think, you know, my earlier point about, you know, I think the obligated parties will probably have a good shot at hitting that 16% attainment target in the early years. And then maybe, you know, we do know that in the statute, there's a good cause adjustment, you know, for market factors or things like that. This, in my mind, would be, you know, if there's just, you know, if the obligated parties do hit that 16% target in the early years and really do have a high level of attainment, that's a great thing. So if we were to kind of exhaust the greenhouse gas reduction potential in the early years, I think no one would be complaining about that. But maybe at that point they say, okay, there's clearly X amount of greenhouse gas emissions reductions to be had from this, you know, from the low income group, and then targets could be maybe adjusted, you know, going forward from a, you know, 5-10 years down the road kind of time frame. But I definitely don't think we should recommend that that's lowered. I think we need to, you know, the obligated parties to work as hard as they can to hit that target. And then we do know that there's going to be a potential study, you know, kind of every few years moving forward throughout the program. And presumably that potential study would map kind of, you know, low income attainment, you know, greenhouse gas reduction attainment of, you know, and progress towards those targets. So we will have more data every few years in the program. So I think we should touch upon it, say that, you know, call it out, that it is what it is. And pretty much I am inclined to say that we support, you know, obligated parties working as hard as they can to get those emissions reductions from that group in the early years, because technically the emissions reductions do exist. Just when you spread it out over the study horizon, which was out to 2050, it becomes difficult. So there's a little, you know, it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying it's not attainable. So yeah.
Okay, let's think about where that can show up in our final report. I mean, I'm happy to table this for now. We are getting close to like needing to write some of this down on paper, and I don't know that there's a designated section in our final. Oh, and let's mute if someone's hearing background noise. I guess I'm just trying to hear from the rest of the EAG, like when do we deal with this and how? Do we move this forward? Doesn't have to be now, but like, where does this show up in the report, if at all? Are there any suggestions from the group about where to stick this in if we want to?
We'll have a section for recommendations, yes?
Not necessarily a specific section. We're going to have some of the recommendations in sections about specific group, like recommendations how to help renters and people in manufactured homes. We also have a section on like, this is what we told the PUC. I don't know that we have a like top line recommendation section, but we could have a sort of grab bag recommendation section for things that don't affect specific groups. I think that's an option. We just hadn't really dealt with the whole like, where do overarching recommendations that we have not already told the PUC go? But that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I would recommend us having a recommendation section at the end.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree that maybe we have like sort of as you mentioned, sort of a grab bag kind of miscellaneous recommendation section, you know, maybe leading into a discussion. And then in the discussion section, you'd have those recommendations that you could then reference and, provide more context on or whatever. But I think I'm trying to think of what else would go into that section, but I'm sure as the draft rule is released, there's going to be plenty of material to look over, and we might find ourselves having more to add there.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Yeah, for sure. Emily?
I'm just curious why this wouldn't go in the low income section of the demographics.
Oh, that is a good point. Yeah, that does make sense. That does make sense that it is specifically that group. Yeah, okay. Let's plan on doing that. And if we don't feel like that like synergizes well, or there's like other overarching sections, we'll have a mental bullet point to reorganize. But that's a good point, Emily. That is a really specific recommendation for the group.
Yeah, great suggestion. Also, it just occurred to me, we're probably going to have some potentially some recommendations on statutory changes that we're recommending. I suppose each one of those, as Emily just sort of alluded to, we're looking to attach it to the specific section. So yeah, in my mind, I had kind of pictured, okay, like have this, write out all the demographic, information related specific to those, then we might have a few left over. But I suppose we could do our best to try to make sure they get lodged in sort of like firmly in one of those topics so that they're kind of neatly. So yeah, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But yeah, I guess as you just mentioned, me a kind of TBD on that separate grab bag section. So.
Yeah, and we'll monitor that. I'd love for us to have a clear direction where we're headed, but if it's not working well in the final draft, we can move stuff around. But yeah, if we can have a consistent work plan, that'll all serve us well. Okay, I think that's great. Is there any other conversation that anyone wants to have about this particular item? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to hand it over back to Ashira to talk about the PUC draft rule.
Yes, and so on the draft rules, this conversation is more a logistical question than anything else. So we have the written responses are due on November 1st. So we have our next meeting will be October 15th, where we can talk about kind of like our reflections on the draft rules and whatever recommendations or comments or suggestions we want to give the PUC. And then we have, I think it would be October 29th. And so that day would more be about, kind of ratifying any suggestions that we want to give, any written recommendations that we want to give. So it really only seems like we have one day, one EAG meeting to have read and thought about the draft rule and then come to some kind of consensus about what the EAG wants to write back. Of course, you can always submit individual recommendations, but the strength is really coming together as the EAG. So we have just a question about the timing logistics around that. And while I do that, let me just go ahead and stop sharing this. And so we had a couple of different suggestions on how to go about this. One would be potentially repurposing some of the report editing time. So we have some time next week on the 8th I think it's the 8th. Actually, it might be the 9th, October 9th to repurpose the editing time to talk a little bit more about the draft rule and have initial reactions. We could also, but that would mean that we would have less time to do the editing. So we could also have 2 different subgroup meetings in between now and the next full EAG meeting on the 15th. So looking to you all to see what you think, what's the best use of our time given that we have a pretty short deadline. Any thoughts?
Yeah. we definitely don't have a ton of time. I definitely like the idea of taking some time from the report writing. I'm just wondering how much of the final report or what we want to respond to in the draft rule might also have a dual purpose of ending up in the final report. Like if we could, maybe utilize some of the same language. But that said, I personally am willing to add another meeting to, come up with some equity specific responses to the draft rule. So, if that's what needs to happen, obviously this is going to be a busy time for pretty much everyone involved with the Clean Heat Standard, because the department will have our own comments, etc. But I think it's important that as an EAG, we do provide equity related response to the draft rule specifically.
Emily.
I was just wondering if Dominic could share if the PUC has any expectations, or if you personally have any thoughts around the EAG response to the draft rule versus what we're going to be putting in this the EAG report for January. Like how, I don't know, and I guess, is there anything the PUC is thinking about in terms of how much you were hoping the EAG would respond, like if it was going to be a more extensive review or yeah.
So not officially from the commission, but my take on the moment is the more responses we can get, the better. And I think the more perspectives that encapsulates, the better we'll be able to edit this before it goes to the legislature. There will be some things in this rule that even the commission agrees are issues, but given our current statutory structure, we don't feel that we have the authority to change. From the perspective of the group, I think the first place to start with the draft rule is to look at where we came down on some of the things that were recommended to us by the EAG. For the recommendations that were explicit, I think the commission followed EAG's suggestions pretty darn closely, but it's not 100%. And so taking a look at those and saying, does that strike the balance that we in EAG were looking to find? I think that would be the first part. The second, and I think this will be more targeted at the people who think about this more holistically, and I am looking at more of the longstanding PUC interveners, is with your experience in working with the commission's rules, does this look like a rule for a program that will work? And I think there's a valuable eye there for both people, or entities like the department and other state agencies and Efficiency Vermont. And there's also a place for people who have not been engaged and are reading it for the first time, or reading commission rule for the first time and saying, hey, as someone who doesn't work with you all the time, this just doesn't make sense, because this program has us regulated entities we've never regulated before. So I think both sides of that perspective would be useful, and this seems like a group that can channel that. For the what is going to overlap with the report, I think that's much closer to the status report document. We do pontificate a bit on things that we think will work, won't work, or places that we feel there are barriers erected in front of the commission, and understanding where the commission's head is at and where the EAG feels like you still need to push the envelope when it comes to the report. So to shorten the answer a little bit, yes, I think there's a role on both sides. I think if the EAG starts with the issues that it has already talked about and made recommendations on, that would probably be the best use of time on the exact rule front. And then looking at our status document is trying to kind of read where the commission's head is at. And is this on any given issue, is this something that the EAG and commission are already aligned? Easy thing to note in the report to the legislator. Are there things that the commission is not talking about that the EAG thinks is important and will therefore need a highlight in the EAG's report to the legislature?
I'll add that I think in our final report, we'll probably just have a section being like, we advise the PUC this, and you can see it in our comments and this is what happened in the actual report. Like, I don't think it has to be a blow by blow thing, but it's like, here's some issues were raised. Here's how they responded. Here's our response to that response. And I think it's going to be hard to figure out how to deal with that with all the moving parts of what shows up in the final rule and what, you know, our recommendations were and how our report progress is going. But I think we'll certainly have a section to speak to like, well, this is what we advise sort of along the way so the legislature is caught up to like the insane trail of memos and stuff in the docket. So that's what I see our value in the final report, in addition to commenting along with the draft rule, like a direct feedback. So just for some color on how I think that's going to show up.
I have just a like very quick like a straw poll that I can launch, and you can just click which one works best for you. So either repurposing the EAG report writing time, finding an additional time and keeping the report writing time that we already have, or if you have another suggestion, you can click on that and just be prepared to propose what that suggestion is. So can you all see the poll on your screens? No? Okay, let's see.
Oh.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So it looks like we had 2 people who said find an additional time and keep our report writing time. We had 1 person who said other. So who's the other and what is your proposal?
I am the other, and my proposal is that people read and respond individually.
Read and respond individually to the draft rule. Any thoughts on that from the AG?
Well, I would just offer sort of an amendment to that suggestion, I guess I'd call it, not an official amendment, just like to piggyback off of that. What if, I mean, we could all, you know, have our equity related thoughts on the rule prepared individually, and then maybe come to a meeting with them sort of already ready. So it's, in terms of a meeting, it'd be a little bit more shortened, and we'd all have something to kind of bring to the meeting, and then we could, you know, see where there's differences and opinions and stuff, and then put and submit it as one, rather than go to a group and kind of like slog through it together. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in, Pike, but yeah, just a thought. Others have their hands up, so.
Yeah.
Emily?
I think Dominic was next, and I'll go after Dominic.
Yeah, I'm just popping in to say it appears we've lost quorum. We're down to 5 members right now rather than 6. The meeting was appropriately opened, so I don't see a problem with continuing to have this conversation. Will be recorded and published appropriately, but the EG can no longer take any official action. So we won't be able to vote on anything for the rest of the meeting unless someone rejoins.
And I've checked in with Chris to see if he's having technical difficulties, and maybe he can come back. So maybe we might be able to regain quorum. But yes, for now, we can make no official decisions. But go ahead, Emily.
I was just going back to recommending next steps. I agree with Ben. I think coming prepared to I think it's the 8th, the report writing meeting time, with I think things you'd want the EAG to write. I expect that there's just, because it's not one single thing, the group will be moving forward to the PUC in response to the draft rule. I think that this might take some time to go through and get consensus or agreement on what to move forward. So I think being prepared as an expectation for that meeting with individual thoughts of what the EAG should move forward. And then, yeah, that makes sense to me.
And to clarify, that would be everyone writing their individual responses before the October 15th meeting.
I think that it doesn't have to be a write-up and sharing it ahead of time. Just from my perspective, I think that I'll be doing my own review for Efficiency Vermont for their response to the draft rule and as an organization. And so I think that a lot of folks are really busy with the RFI out right now. So I think personally, not having a write-up due before the 8th, but having like notes and coming prepared for what you think the equity advisory group should share would be most helpful from my perspective and doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think we have struggled to kind of digest material as a group on the fly. Like, I don't know, to be honest, that everyone is going to have like policy recommendations formulated. And I do think that the PUC takes our recommendations really seriously. I mean, we have two options to sort of take a swing at it in the first meeting and, you know, vote on in the second. I do worry that that may not go well in practice. And I have found that when we've sort of gone over things in the credit issues group beforehand, it has given us clarity of suggestions, and there's still a need to discuss it with the full EAG, but it's gotten more coherent policies through. So I would make another plug. I suggested we do both report writing and EAG draft rule conversation, which seems like a glutton for punishment, but I think in the interest of time, I think I would sort of switch my vote to say, let's drop the report writing. Our intern can keep, you know, making this, and we could still do our individual comments on the renters that we've discussed and what we'll talk about in the next section. But I do think maybe we should try to, if there's enough people available, to try to make a time so people could informally discuss the draft rule and we could have some coherent suggestions.
Are you thinking taking the report writing meeting and kind of converting it for the next one, converting it to the draft rule response writing?
Yeah,
Using
that was
yeah.
that was one of the options this year. And I said I'd switch my vote to that just to
Got
you
it.
know.
Okay.
I know everyone's busy. It's a good point. It's hard to find time for two blockbuster meetings, you know, in a week besides this. I totally get it, but I think we'll be grateful we took the time to have an informal, long conversation without trying to stuff it into one of these meetings. If anyone
I
has that.
support that.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Because as you mentioned, Emily, I'm going to be reading it anyway. So I'm just going to basically, you know, maybe I'll use a different color highlighter for all the equity stuff. You know, it's yeah, sounds good.
So it sounds like, and I did hear back from Chris. He said that if we do need to make any decisions, he can jump back on, but he does have another meeting that he has to attend. So it sounds like to me that we're going more, and I don't know if this actually needs a vote, because it sounds like we are looking at each reviewing separately, and then at the report writing meeting next week, maybe the group that's attending the report writing meeting can decide what is the most appropriate path forward, if they want to use that time to get another section done, or if they want to use that time to write report related things that are also that respond directly to the draft rule.
I think that's a good needle to thread this year. Let's plan on that, and you can speak to that and why we came to that decision in the meeting follow-up, and we'll just do it that way. And we certainly have report content to cover as well, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So let's do that.
Emily?
I apologize. I just think I lost the thread for a second. So did we agree to have another meeting in addition to the report writing meeting, or just not have a meeting before the EAG?
Just one meeting. Sorry, go ahead and share.
Yeah, so the normal report writing meeting still stands. So the one on October 9th. And it will be based on it will be to write and edit the report, and if there are specific things that are from the draft rule that group wants to discuss, they'll make that decision during that meeting itself.
We're into some weird territory without a quorum, but I think our existing, authorization that we've set up to discuss report writing issues will cover us. I don't see a problem with that as chair. We're going to meet, we'll discuss things that'll show up in the final report, and Ashira can make clear that that could have a few different topics in our email. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, any other questions on that? We're actually making good time. Just as an update on what happened in the report editing group last time. So that was me, Ben, Emily, and Pike showed up, and I think we actually made great progress. It was kind of slow going, but I do think that'll improve. And it's just basically for we had the group outline, and then our intern at VHFA, who has some time for this, sort of tried to assemble it in a coherent order with citations and complete sentences as best she could. And then the four of us met and kind of did a line by line review. We got through about half of it and kind of turned that into which of these things do we think are actual suggestions versus just sort of musings? Where is the missing context or an actual recommendation? And that was what was circulated in the meeting packet. And I'll note too, I did this on my desktop in Word, but next time the group requested that we get this in Google Docs so more people on the meeting can edit, and I will work with Ashira to make that possible next time. So yeah, overall, I think it went really well. I'll turn it over to the rest of the group to say lessons learned and outlook going forward about what we think about this process.
Yeah, I think it was valuable time. And I also feel like we made pretty good progress, and yeah, I think it worked really well. So I know that this section in particular was a little bit more robust because of the work that your intern did, which was great. So there was definitely plenty to react to there. And I assume we're just kind of planning on moving forward in the same fashion for all the other sections as we go along. Obviously, I think am I wrong in saying we have more sections than we have meetings for?
Definitely, yeah. My hope is to I've put the intern on to working through the low-income household section, which is going to be big. I think after that, if she gets through that, I was planning on giving her the manufactured housing section since we finished that today. I think kind of everything else is going to have to be worked on individually, but we'll see. I think my goal, and I'd love to hear from the group, is to get sort of as much done as we can and focus our energy on the ones we think that are going to be the biggest or most potentially complicated or controversial. But I thought we would do what we can with the time that we have, because based on we had a really lively discussion and points of disagreement and things that we kind of clarified amongst ourselves. And I think that would be just so hard to replicate in one of our full meetings when it just took a long time to get through. What did we mean here? And is that relevant, or is that true? It was just a tough process.
But I think we did good. Yeah, I think we did good.
I do also want to note that right before the meeting, Pike sent over an additional edit. So the one that we're currently reviewing, you can see Pike's additional edits in purple.
Okay.
So I've dropped the link to that in the chat.
Okay, and I don't know if we can do anything with that, or we should just incorporate that into our next meeting. So I'll remember to grab those comments and we can do it. Yeah, we only got through about halfway through the comments and halfway through the content, and definitely didn't think we were going to shut off the first part. We gave ourselves some individual assignments to get more context and parts of the report to chase down citations or clarify comments. So I'll make sure to include those, Pike, whenever we next adopt this.
Go ahead, Pike.
And did you get any work, or did you find out anything from Burlington Electric regarding their weatherization program?
Yeah, I started to look into that. I was going to come prepared for the next meeting to elaborate on that. But yeah, I started to read through the statute and stuff and what they have for sure. I wasn't prepared to speak on it today, but yes, I have begun the research process on that. Yep.
Yeah, not just the statute, but the current state of where they are with implementing it.
Yep.
You know, I had suggested only 6 out of 300 units have been done, and if you could verify that or corroborate that, that would be good.
Yep. Yeah. You know, being an employee of the department, we have contacts there. So I was actually planning on sending out some correspondence to them to clarify, you know, anything additional they want to add on that program, so that we have some professional communication there to talk about and some of the challenges they've had. So yes, that is TBD, but that's in the works.
Sounds good. And we discussed, I had chatted with Ben just about what he was going to share with the group, Ben Oakley-Walsh, and he did mention that he was, you know, excited about the window units, and I think that belongs in the renter section. We can put it in other sections as well, but we talked about having that, you know, in relation to the split incentive discussion. So we can take the materials that he discussed today and reference some of that data.
I can follow up too if there's any information on the organization side that is able to be shared. I know it's like early on in the pilot process, but I can just ask.
Yeah, anything you have about like how much money there is or expected scope, but I think we can just say, well, this exists, and, you know, follow up. I think we can come up with something that works with what's publicly available. Okay, yeah. So any questions or lessons learned? Like I said, I think it was time consuming, but really like a good process, and I think it's much stronger than it was when we started.
Yeah, I think it looks good. Nothing else to add.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we'll move forward when we can. We'll plan on, unless there's something else like the draft rule that comes up, meeting every other week as often as we can to get as much done of this. And then as we get closer, we'll just have to keep talking about individual assignments to get this over the finish line. Okay, great. And then so the public engagement group did not meet. So I think that should be it, and we're ready for next steps unless I'm missing something. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ashira then.
Oh, that was really amazing, especially with everything we had on the
Yeah.
schedule for today. So the only next steps that I have are that I will send out the dates for the public meetings, and Dominic sent that over to me. So that's the technical meeting is on October 7th. The general meeting is on October 30th, and I'll send out the times for that as well. And the deadline for written comments is November 1st. If there is anything else, please let me know, but that is the only action item I've captured.
Yeah, I'll coordinate with Ashira on the technical aspects of trying to get some Google Docs going for our report writing group. That's on my list. Yeah, and actually, I don't know. I'll touch base with Ashira. I don't know that we actually have any guest speakers. I was hoping to get Virginie Diambo from CVOEO for next meeting, but I haven't heard back from her. I think she was traveling, so I don't know that we'll have her for next meeting, but that just means we get to dig into the draft rule. So that hopefully will be the bulk of what happens next time. But we'll touch base with follow-ups and then an agenda as the next meeting gets closer. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. I think that was great. I will call this meeting to a close.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too.